What is far deadlier than most people realize? Real black licorice root extract contains a natural sweetener which is over 50 times sweeter than sucrose. This ingredient has various pharmaceutical properties. It acts as an expectorant, facilitating removal of mucus from the lungs by coughing, and it increases blood pressure. The latter effect can become significant with a daily consumption of 50 grams or more of licorice candy for as little as 2 weeks. It can cause potassium levels in the body to fall, triggering abnormal heart rhythms, as well as high blood pressure, edema, swelling, lethargy, and congestive heart failure in some people. Now, I'll be honest, I'm a coward. The name of the sweetener is in this post, and I just didn't know how to pronounce it, and I don't know how to even start. Glycerizin, I think? It has 2 R's and then an H and a Z. I was intimidated. I'm sorry. Story 2. Posted safety precautions. When there are signs saying something, lots ignore it thinking they know better. I used to work IT for a place that makes big tractors. Different stations are restricted from using certain PPE. One day, this lady was wearing the wrong gloves. Her station is only supposed to use a latex. Well, she didn't take that seriously and wore thicker reinforced gloves. She was using the lug nut machine that tightens 12 giant lugs at once. Her glove got caught, and instead of ripping the fingertip off of her latex glove, it ripped her thumb right the hell off her hand. I witnessed it, and her mistake haunts me to this day. They had to restrain her while 2 men held her hand up in the air away from her. Her wails and screams were terrifying, all because she ignored a well-placed warning. Story 3. Just want to throw a story out here. I'm a dentist. I have a colleague who had a patient that needed a root canal. The patient put it off. He had a vacation coming up. He was going to Alaska and bush country to go hunting by himself. Now, Alaska bush country means you're alone. He was dropped off and his ride wasn't coming to pick him up for a week or 2. Well, after his ride left, the tooth he needed to get his root canal on blew up. Had severe pain and was all alone. No one to help him in the middle of nowhere. This was mid to late 90s, so no cell phone either. Well, his ride came back to pick him up and finds a dead body. The guy took his own life. He couldn't take the pain. Pain was so bad he couldn't wait the 1 or 2 weeks for his ride to come back. Shot himself, leaving a note telling his story. Moral of the story, don't put this crap off. There is no pain like tooth pain. Story 4. Quitting antidepressants cold turkey after regular use. Did cold turkey Prozac and olanzapine. Right now tapering Lexapro. And worst evil cold turkey of all time awards go to benzodiazepines and pregabalin. Lyrica. Took clonazepam always. Quitting these medicines cold turkey 99% of the time gives you a seizure. I had to, but guess what? I'm already epileptic, so more seizures. Yay! P.S. People saying taking antidepressants in the first place is bad for you? No, it's not. It saved my life. I didn't know I had depression, but I stopped eating, had extreme stomach issues, gas, acid reflux, etc. Lost 15 kilograms of weight in 30 days, stopped eating at all. I've seen 5 gastroenterologists, so many tests like endoscopy, colonoscopy, liver function, blood, stools, etc. Everything was normal. Suffered for a whole year. I was close to death. Then I was recommended a psychiatrist. She told me I have somatization. Meds started working from day 1. I felt happy and started to eat. Gained all that weight back again in 1 month. The weight loss and gaining thing was like some kind of Christian Bale thing. Story 5. Visine. People seem to have this idea that a few drops of Visine in someone's drink will give them diarrhea and do it to prank each other, or get some sort of satisfaction with petty revenge. People are sitting in prison for murder for doing this. The main active ingredient is called tetrahydrozoline. Once it enters your gastrointestinal tract, it can be absorbed by your intestines and end up in your blood, causing your blood pressure and heart rate to drop to potentially life-threatening levels. It really makes me wonder how many people have died due to people copycatting that scene in Wedding Crashers. Story 6. Smoke. It's not only the fire that's dangerous, and there's a very good reason you're taught to stay low escaping a fire. The smoke is a hot gas layer that can melt your face off. Edit. Since this comment has some visibility, I'm going to use it for a public safety announcement. A working smoke alarm is the single most effective fire safety tool you can have by far. Early warning will save your life. Most fatal fires happen in the middle of the night when families are asleep. The difference between life and death are only minutes apart. If you have smoke alarms in your house, make sure they're on every level and test them regularly. If you haven't done so in a while, do it now. If you don't have smoke alarms on every level of your home, go out and buy them. Your life is worth the money. You know what? I bet there's someone out there who went and tested their smoke alarm after hearing this, and hey, OP may have inadvertently just saved a life. Well, not inadvertently, they tried to, but you know what I mean. With a degree of separation. But I gotta say, I agree. Test those smoke alarms. Stay safe, everybody. Story 7. Windows. It's easy to think they're more secure than they actually are, which is especially dangerous in taller buildings. Falling through a broken window has a very high risk of a major laceration. Broken glass on the floor can again mess up your body spectacularly, and on certain surfaces, it's really hard to spot even moderately sized razor-sharp pieces. Life pro tip for those living in areas that are earthquake prone: keep a pair of slippers or sandals by your bedside. If there's an earthquake during the night, the chances are you'll have picture frames that fell and shattered around your home, and you should have something hard-soled to walk on in that situation. Edit. Be a thoughtful human. If you break something made from glass, don't just toss the broken glass, put it into a cardboard box, tape it up so it's sealed, and write broken glass on the box. My parents use layers of newspaper and tape it up. You have no idea who might handle the bag with your rubbish in it. Story 8. Anything to do with the thyroid. It's a bit more well known nowadays, but when I was first diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, they told me it was hypothyroidism at first. I didn't even know what the thyroid was. For people who might not know, the thyroid is a butterfly-shaped gland in your throat. Without getting into it too much, it releases hormones that regulate many things. You wouldn't expect this tiny little organ to be so important, but holy crap, it is. I found out I had thyroid issues when I was 15 after I was constantly tired, had irregular periods. I've gone 2 months without one before. My weight was out of whack, my mental health was constantly declining, and I had issues with breathing among other symptoms. Apparently, if I hadn't started taking thyroid medication when I did, I would have gone into a coma within 2 weeks. It didn't help that I had a dad who constantly made fun of my weight and appearance even after finding out I had the issues and learning how hard it was for me to lose weight. Turns out his 2 sisters had hypothyroidism and his brother had hyperthyroidism. It took quite a few years to finally find hormonal balance, and I'm 20 now, but I'm doing a lot better than I was before, physically and mentally. Story 9. Exploring abandoned places. When I was a kid, I would do it all the time and take photos without any form of facial protection. Fast forward years later, and I learned about how toxic certain molds can be, and how many older buildings use materials like asbestos, which can be in the air when places are left to rot. At this point, I just thank God I've never had to deal with the aftermath of any of that. Also, to anyone who enjoys doing this, I get it. I just want to bring awareness to the fact that if you participate, a respirator and goggles should be a must. Also, as a side note, be wary of scrappers and individuals looking for a place to do drugs. Had a run-in like that during one of my last excursions I made, and it's not fun. Story 10. NSFW answer, but sharing/using intimate toys and other insertables. And not just in the sense of sterilization, but also improper stretching, lubing, and proper maintenance of your body and toys/insertables. I work in an adult store, and I do my own research into the products we sell, and let me tell you, the horror stories of newbies picking up an 8-inch fake dong after seeing it in a video and going, hey, if they can do it, so can I, are too many to count. I have seen/heard of/brought close friends of mine to the hospital and ER just to help them get their body patched up from improper use. I have seen the result of improper use of non-lubricating substances on people's bodies, and I had a friend who died from a terrible rectum infection. I know some of you are going to do these things anyway, and I've already made my point, but if you want to protect yourself, here are 5 things to ensure you're all safe from bad intimate practices. 1. Soap and water. Clean yourself and your toys before and after. Regular unscented soap and warm water will be enough. There is also toy cleaner on the market which works just as well. 2. Start small, lots of lube. Those professionals on the XXX tapes, they are professionals for a reason. They work their way up. Start small and use more lube than you think you need. 3. More. I ain't kidding. The more the merrier. Also, I always recommend water and silicone-based lubes. The following is not lube. Bengay, butter, Tabasco/hot sauce, alcohol, plain water, spit, juice, bleach, clean solutions, blood, anything else that is not water/silicone-based lube. 4. Is it used, or do you not know who had it? Don't use it. STDs are still out there, and can be easily carried over on toys that infected individuals play with, even after soap and water. If you know the previous owner is clean, still proceed with caution. Also, ask for permission before you play with other people's toys. 5. Pain is not pleasure. Look, as much as the BDSM community will glare at me for this, If it hurts, pull out immediately. Pain is your body's way of saying, stop. So ignoring it is both stupid and life-threatening. Only follow pain once you are certain it is the expected kind of pain. Spanking, soreness, electroplay, whatever. Actually, double-check that last one. That may be a fault in your electric device. Story 11. Trains. You can be standing away from the tracks and they can still end your life. The train could be going fast enough to create suction and pull you under. It happened to a person walking by the tracks near Ottawa many years ago. Never attempt to climb on a train car whether it is sitting or in motion. Sitting trains can start moving at any time, and a train in motion might take a limb with it. Trains can derail. If you're near the tracks, well, you're probably dead. Anything that isn't secured is going to be acting like a diesel-powered whip. A steel strap being pulled by a fast freight train will chop you into little pieces. Containers fall from trains. If one lands on you, they're going to need a spatula to clean you up. And for those who walk on the tracks, train time is any time. And depending on the direction of the wind and your attention span, you won't know the train is there until it's going through your body. Tracks are for trains. Stay on the sidewalk. Story 12. Heat. Seriously. Not even, quote, that much of it. Few decades ago when I was in boot camp, we were doing a 10-mile march. I'd had surgery a couple weeks before the march, which wasn't a problem for the march itself, aside from the mild to moderate pain, which caused me to sweat more than usual. For whatever reason, the Army forgot to set up water refill stations this day. 1 mile in, I was through all my water. 2 miles in, I was absolutely drenched in sweat. 6 miles in, I stopped sweating but continued getting hotter. 9 miles in, I fell face first into the dirt, completely unconscious and in a severe state of dehydration. Got rushed to the ER. I was told I was a few minutes away from never waking up. Totally screwed up my insides now. I'm an old man, but my guts, kidneys, etc. are screwed. I get migraines regularly, and apparently it's an occasional side effect of a single exposure to severe heat stroke. Stay cool, drink lots of water. Story 13. Lawn sprays and de-weeding products. Lots of the chemicals have been banned in European countries. If you see the yellow sign on the lawn, you really should stay off of it for at least a week after the initial application. And proper equipment to even spray the chemicals calls for rubber boots, fully clothed, rubber gloves, eye goggles, and a proper ventilation mask. It destroys me to see the summer landscaping guys out there in tank tops and work shorts and boots. Many of them may face diseases later in life due to these chemicals. Knowledge from taking biology, chemistry, organic chem, toxicology, and endocrine disruption courses at college. Further knowledge, if there's a spray that's being advertised as, quote, safe to use indoors, it doesn't mean that there's no harmful chemicals in it that you're inhaling. It only means that the chemicals per one use fall into a safe to ingest limit. You might be surprised how many things we're exposed to because they're deemed to be at safe levels. The only real safe level is 0. This one's surprising to me, to be honest, because, yeah, the stuff you're spraying is meant to end things' lives. What do you think that's going to do to you? I'd be surprised if it helped you. Story 14. So many things. I work in an operating room, and you'd be amazed at the number of people who get severely injured or murdered by ridiculous things. A few examples. A child running from his brother fell into a TV stand and broke a hole into his trachea. A tremendous number of people fall from ladders, many of which are step ladders, like 1 or 2 steps. It will surprisingly screw you up. Garage door springs. I've seen them cave in skulls, chests, and once, a glancing blow severely tore every aspect of his rotator cuff and broke the head of his humerus off. Needed a replacement because of no blood flow to the humeral head. Wood chippers / snowblowers. Even if you turn them off, they're under a fair amount of torque and will do a partial or complete rotation if something sticking in them is released. So be really careful. Dogs. Literally any dog. And despite what your gun-toting uncle might say, 22 caliber bullets. I've seen them puncture skulls and break ribs. While we're at it, pellet guns can puncture skulls too. Trying to answer this is like standing in front of a jukebox. You know thousands of songs but can't think of any. I'm too tired to think of more, but there are so freaking many more. Story 15. Fresh water. You know how if someone half drowns in a movie or something, they get pulled out of the water and then they're given CPR or whatever and they cough up a bunch of water and turn out to be okay? Yeah, so that's only a thing in salt water. Someone who inhales fresh water like that will probably just die. But very few people realize this difference. It has to do with osmosis. When you inhale water, the cells in your lungs try to equalize the salt levels in the water inside and outside your cells. The water in your cells is typically pretty full of electrolytes, so it's relatively salty. If you inhale salt water, there's a pretty decent chance that the water in your cells will be around the same saltiness as the water you just inhaled. So the amount of water that gets moved into or out of your cells, fairly limited, meaning there really isn't instant damage. But if the water you inhale is fresh, then suddenly there's extremely low salt content water outside the cell and fairly high salt content water inside the cell. So the water rushes into the cell to dilute the high salt content water in an attempt to make it the same amount of salty as the water outside the cell. This is bad because the cell will burst. Your lungs are damaged pretty severely from the moment you inhale fresh water, and it doesn't really matter if you get the water back out again because your lungs are screwed up and you won't be able to breathe anyway. This isn't an attempt to scare people off of swimming in lakes or anything, but you should realize there are dangers involved in activities on fresh water that just aren't present when you're on salt water, and that almost every single film and TV show in existence will depict a drowning as if it were in salt water, regardless of what type of water they're actually in. Story 16. Foraging for edible plants in the wild. Many edible plants have poisonous lookalikes. Is that a wild grape or a moon seed? Is that a moral or a false moral? Make a mistake, and you're very sick or dead. People think they can read one article about edible plants and then just be going out picking plants to eat in the wild to get back to nature. Even seasoned naturalists can make a mistake, and you're not wiser or more resilient than poisonous plants. Plus, if you're lost, hungry, and foraging, you'll likely burn more calories hunting for plants to eat than you'll forage. Even if you're lucky and you don't off yourself, you might get really sick and end up dehydrated due to vomiting or diarrhea. Even if you totally luck out and find a safe plant to eat, you'll have wasted energy you should be using to find and collect water, and possibly also building a shelter depending on your situation. Stick to your vegetable gardens and whole foods, folks. Story 17. Psychologically abusive relationships. People who haven't personally been through one have no idea how bad it gets, how much it makes you seek out wanting to take your own life, because anything would be better than this place you are stuck in. And that's the real danger of it. People on the outside will say, well, if it's so bad, why don't you just leave? Or, why do you keep going back? Because they don't understand how screwed your brain becomes, how you become chemically addicted like a narcotics addiction. Most people addicted to drugs don't want to be. They try and try and try to stop, but the addiction wins out. Psychologically abusive relationships can be the same. Story 18. Adventures in Hawaii. I say Hawaii because it's where I live. Born and raised Hawaii Island, living Kauai Island. I imagine any tropical destination has its same hazards. Many times visitors see locals enjoying different activities and/or have read/heard of hidden gems, but don't take into account the actual hazards which are unseen. The amount of tourists who die while on vacation here is sobering. Not all of these deaths make it to the news either. Our, quote, industry is tourism, go figure. Just because people are enjoying a spot or activity does not necessarily make it safe for everyone. I've personally heard too often after rescuing people from the surf that they didn't think it was that dangerous because they knew how to swim and that it looked safe enough. Valley and ridge hikes are another one. Know before you go. Respect the locals by asking. Better to go home from your vacation with sunburn because you didn't apply enough sunscreen than go home or send a loved one home in a body bag because you didn't ask a local about the hazards of a spot or activity, no matter what you think you know, heard, or saw on social media. For real. Story 19. Farms. As someone who's lived on one their entire life and knows nothing else, they are deadly. I can't begin to list all the dangers. I'm from Ireland and you can't swing a cat without hitting a farmer. The amount of people I know dead from farming incidents is unbelievable. I could name you at least 5 people who've been run over by tractors and farm machinery in the last 3 or 4 years, and they're only the people I know. My dad was working for a man yesterday in the next town and he said he almost got run over by a tractor last week. In the last fortnight alone, I know a woman whose daughter was down on a farm and lost a leg. And I read in the newspaper about a lad of 11 who's in critical condition from an incident involving machinery. The amount of people who have lost fingers, arms, legs, and their lives from PTOs is just horrendous. Agricultural contractors are often devils for standing near sheds when agitating slurry, and you only need 3 breaths of those fumes to end you stone dead. and many a one has fallen down into them. Cattle are absolutely deadly. Sure, they look lovely and cute, but by God, if they take a disliking to you, good luck. They are speedy as hell and will come after you. I have one, and we call her Lucifer because she's an absolute lunatic. She'd jump any gate or fence. Christ, I saw her trying to jump an 8-foot wall once. When she's calving, we send everyone out of the yard except ourselves. She kicked Dad's knee, and he was barely able to walk for a week. Still isn't right after it, but all the same, we're lucky she hasn't murdered us. And bulls can be a ton, so good luck there too. Even sheep can break your hip or leg. You wouldn't believe the force behind their pucks. And if you fell down and they got a solid hit to your head, you are dead as a doornail. I feel like I blacked out for the rest of this one because the phrase, "can't swing a cat without hitting a farmer," took me out. What are you doing swinging a cat for? I don't know what it is. Hearing expressions that I usually wouldn't hear always gets me. Story 20. Boys getting cut. It's well established that female genital mutilation is traumatizing and damaging, but many people still think that the male version is harmless. There are documented cases of people taking their own lives because of it. It also reduces the success of transition surgery and can cause body dysmorphia. The trauma of it has been established, but the US's news media and culture is adamant about cutting off parts of baby dongs. And by the way, people make money from it. The industry around it has an interest in misinforming the public. Just as one basic example, doctors get paid extra for doing it, and they're also the ones who recommend the procedure. This is a forced procedure the doctor's incentivized to conduct. And now imagine being a male who's cut and having a male child, and the doctor, news, and people around are telling you it's healthy, and that removing all those nerves and the frenulum and rigid band isn't bad, and is fine to do without consent because the baby no feel knife because baby. Easy to see how parents just say yes because they don't know any better or don't want to. It's sickening. So if you're reading this, please support intactivism and please stop mutilating children. Whole issue matter aside, shout out for the name intactivism. That's good. As for where I fall on this, yeah, I think it should be more of an elective thing as you get older. I know the arguments from both sides and don't want to get into it too much here because the thread isn't about that, but I do think it is definitionally mutilation, and as such should be considered a bit more as such, you know? Anyway, moving on. Story 21. Falls. My uncle fell over around Christmas time 2020. He didn't manage to put his hands out in front of his face, so he face planted into the concrete footway. Unconscious, he was taken to the hospital and an operation had to be performed on the vertebrae in his neck. After the operation, he couldn't move any muscle below his jaw. The hospital staff tried really hard to get his arms and legs to work, but to no avail. He is now a quadriplegic and can't do anything that he used to without the help of others. He is completely reliant on nursing staff to take a crap or eat some food. No way he can play any games unless I can find some voice-activated games for him or read any books. Those were his two favorite pastimes. He can't work anymore, can't participate in intimate activities. His whole body is pretty much immobile, and he has to be moved by nursing staff for everyday activities and also to relieve pressure on parts of his body. All of this from a fall. His life expectancy has been reduced by 10 plus years because he fell over. His joy of life almost evaporated. Story 22. Apparently, not cleaning your groceries can end you. Here's something I found. A stock clerk was sent to clean up a storeroom in Maui, Hawaii. When he got back, he was complaining that the storeroom was really filthy and that he had noticed dried mouse/rat droppings in some areas. A couple of days later, he started to feel like he was coming down with a stomach flu, complained of sore joints and headaches, and began to vomit. He went to bed and never really got up again. Within 2 days, he was severely ill and weak. His blood sugar count was down to 66 and his face and eyeballs were yellow. He was rushed to the emergency at Palimomi where he was diagnosed to be suffering from massive organ failure. He died shortly before midnight. No one would have made the connection between his job and his death had it not been for a doctor who specifically asked if he had been in a warehouse or exposed to dried rat or mouse droppings at any time. They said there is a virus, much like the hantavirus, that lives in dried rat and mouse droppings. Once dried, these droppings are like dust and can easily be breathed in or ingested if a person doesn't wear protective gear or fails to wash their face and hands thoroughly. An autopsy was performed on the clerk to verify the doctor's suspicions. This is why it is extremely important to always carefully rinse off the tops of canned sodas or food and to wipe off pasta packaging, cereal boxes, and so on. Almost everything you buy in a supermarket was stored in a warehouse at one time or another, and stores themselves often have rodents. Many of us remember to wash vegetables and fruits, but never think of boxes and cans. The ugly truth is even the most modern, upper-class superstore has rats and mice, and their warehouse most assuredly does. Whenever you buy any canned soft drink, make sure you wash the top with running water and soap, or if that's not available, drink with a straw. The investigation of soda cans by the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta discovered that the tops of soda cans can be encrusted with dried rat urine, which is so toxic it can be lethal. Canned drinks and other foodstuffs are stored in warehouses and containers that are usually infested with rodents, and then they get transported to retail outlets without being properly cleaned. Story 23. Dehydration. People have no idea how easy it is to get dehydrated. My uncle loves to run and hike. Once he went on a small, easy hike and didn't bring quite enough water. It wouldn't have been a huge problem, but he got lost and was stuck several hours under the sun without water. He managed to get back home, but he almost ended up in the hospital for dehydration. All of this before lunchtime. I had appendicitis a few years ago, and I wasn't able to eat or drink anything for almost 24 hours. When I went to the hospital, they gave IV painkillers before fluids just because I was literally screaming and bent in half from the pain. Really, if it's hot enough, all it takes is a few hours. Dehydration is not a joke. Also, remember that alcohol is literally a diuretic, and a very strong one at that, meaning that it stimulates your kidneys to absorb more water from your blood and produce more urine, which is why you have to pee so often when you're drunk. If you get drunk, remember to drink more water than normal the next day. Story 24. Medical radiation. Seriously, one CT scan is capable of dumping as much radiation into you as the average Hiroshima survivor received. I've seen a report about a little kid who wound up with radiation burns on his skin and cataracts because an upset imaging tech kept rescanning his head every time he squirmed in the CT, over 24 times. There was another case of a woman who had been in a car accident, had a spinal damage, and wound up having 31 goddamn CTs in less than 6 months. Her lifetime cancer risk was through the roof. Seriously, I know a lot of people regard CT machines as the donut of truth, but it's a lot of radiation. Always ask if the CT scan can be replaced with an MRI or ultrasound. And if you're being x-rayed a lot, ask about your dose. Also, if you're getting radiation treatment for cancer, ask about your treatment plan, and get familiar with where the radiation is supposed to go. If you think things aren't quite right or that the wrong part of your body might be irritated, throw a fit. Better you make the hospital health people cranky than take 25 GY to the wrong damn location. Source. I used to be a health physicist for a regulatory agency. I saw way too many misadministration cases. 31 CT scans in less than 6 months? 24 on a kid? There are some medical professionals out there that need to lose their licenses immediately. What are you talking about? The one about the tech who kept rescanning the kid? Oh, I hope they live with guilt for the rest of their lives. Story 25. Wood smoke / barbecue smoke. People don't want to know. They're in complete denial about the toxicity of wood smoke. The PM 2.5, particulate matter with width of 2.5 microns in wood smoke, is only one of the dangerous ingredients in wood smoke. The smoke contains a deadly cocktail of carcinogenic chemicals. That lovely smell of wood smoke people enjoy so much is actually the chemical benzene, which is cancer-causing. There are PAHs too, worse than in car exhaust. Those are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. They're formed during the combustion of organic matter. The PAH content is much higher in wood smoke compared to vehicle exhaust, and, quote, has a higher mutagenic and carcinogenic potential. Wood smoke is second to only diesel exhaust as a super pollutant when it comes to contaminating air. Wood smoke damages one's heart, lungs, and brain. It also contributes greatly to global warming and acid rain. Do yourself, your family, friends, neighbors, and the planet a huge favor, and do not burn wood. Story 26. Chronic sleep deprivation or any kind of lack of sleep. I can't stress this enough. Driving after a night of no sleep is just as dangerous as drunk driving. The plaque buildup in your brain will heighten your risk for Alzheimer's, your immune system is screwed up, increasing your risk of infection and cancer, you're more likely to die of a heart attack, you have more inflammation, you're significantly worse at making good decisions, you do worse at work and school, you're much more likely to become obese, and your memory goes to crap. The list goes on and on. This is coming from someone who has struggled with insomnia their whole lives. No one took me to a doctor for sleeping pills or any kind of treatment, all because the devastating effects of sleep deprivation and insomnia are always overlooked because it's, quote, normal. It's not freaking good. I'm probably going to get Alzheimer's later in life, but so will everyone else because we're living in an epidemic of insomnia, and no one cares. And it's going to bite us all in the butt in 40 years when suddenly dementia diagnoses skyrocket. Story 27. Ringtail lemurs. I work with primates at a facility with exotic animals, and the amount of times I hear people say, "Aw, they're so cute, I just want to hug them." Sure, Karen, hug a lemur. Hug one if you want to go to the hospital for deep lacerations and perhaps even a new face. Hugging a lemur that you do not have a strong bond with, I mean trust, not love, as they rarely trust anyone outside of their troop, is practically asking for it. Ringtail lemurs are extremely defensive wild animals that are defensive thanks to the somewhat harsh environment they come from, not the rainforest. Madagascar isn't one big rainforest. They're not mean, they just know what stranger danger means. Ringtail lemurs have been known to scalp humans who unknowingly step into their territory in the wild. The scalping reportedly happens in about 15 seconds. Guests tapping on the glass of their enclosure while I'm inside could agitate them and put me in harm's way. It annoys the crap out of me. If I didn't have a death wish, just kidding, it would make me pretty nervous. Primates in general, really. They're intelligent, armed with very long, sharp teeth, not all but many, and a grip strength so strong that it can peel the flesh off our puny human bodies like cheese sticks. But yeah, sure, talk about adorable. Look, Opie, I'm gonna need you to take it up with evolution. It's not our fault we find these things adorable. Somewhere along the line, evolution has done us dirty. Sure, let's be terrified of spiders, but find ringtail lemurs adorable. That's not fair. Story 28. Flowing water. Even a shallow or slow amount of flowing water can knock you off your feet, then sweep you away. Water is heavy. 1 cubic meter, or about 3 foot cube, weighs 1,000 kilograms, or about 2,200 pounds. Even flowing, quote, slowly at 4 miles per hour, the average human jogging speed, if the water's up to your shins and you slip, it will be difficult to right yourself. If it's up to your knees, it can easily knock you down on the smallest misstep, and good luck righting yourself. If it's up to your thighs or higher, unless you're tethered to a guide wire, don't even attempt it. It will knock you down, and you're going wherever it's going. And all of this ignoring anything the water may be carrying at you. There was an awesome video I can't find anymore, but a guy demonstrates the danger of different levels of water. He's at a test site or a dam, and they open the gates to flood the plane to different heights, and he shows how it affects his ability to walk through it. Of course, he's properly tethered with a flotation device and has on-site professionals, but it was cool to see just how much an extra foot of depth impacted his ability. Story 29. Crossing the street. I saw a guy get hit at 90 miles per hour while he was crossing. He flew at least 300 feet and was basically no longer solid when he landed. This was in downtown Detroit a few years back. He was coming back from a concert at around midnight with a friend. They were crossing the street in front of the venue, and a presumably drunk driver blew through a red at 90, hit him, and kept going. It happened so fast you couldn't even tell what had occurred. His friend was in shock, standing in the crosswalk looking around trying to figure out what happened, and when it dawned on him, he started screaming and didn't stop for about 20 minutes. The victim was not at all at fault. He crossed when he was supposed to. The driver turned themselves in the next day. Ever since I saw that, I make very sure the cars coming at me are slowing down, and if they're not, I wait until they do. Saving a few seconds isn't worth getting hit. Additional PSA for pedestrians: watch out for people turning, especially big cars and trucks. I've driven trucks where you can lose 2 people in the blind spot while you're turning, and sometimes people walk right into that section of the road. I'm honestly amazed that the driver turned themselves in. I feel like that's so rare in cases like this. Unfortunately, that's the only good thing to come out of that situation. What a horrible, senseless way to lose your life. You did absolutely nothing wrong. Just wrong place, wrong time. My heart goes out to the victim and their family. Story 30. Infection. Don't mess around with it. Far too many people ignore it until it's too late. Also, you don't need a visible cut to contract a deadly staph infection. My dad nearly died from one to his elbow. He was ignoring it, but my mom convinced him to go to the hospital. He ended up on an antibiotic IV and several types of antibiotics before one worked, and he ran a high fever for several days. You can lose a nerve function, digits, limbs, vision, and of course, your life. Sepsis is incredibly dangerous and is the main reason why people died young before antibiotics. There are many ways to get it, but ultimately it's from untreated infection that has gotten into your bloodstream. Death can come quickly, and every minute counts when someone has sepsis. If someone you know has an infection you know is getting worse, make them go to the ER. Forgotten tampons are also responsible for many cases, and women who have just given birth are at high risk. Clean all cuts with soap and water. Neosporin is a good preventative, but you're definitely not guaranteed to get infected without it. A major sign of infection is redness, pain, discharge, and lengthening red streaks from the infected area. Story 31. Be sure to get a yearly checkup with your physician. I had not been to the doctor in 4 years when I went to get what I thought was a hernia checked out, and I was lucky I did. When investigating the hernia, they found stage 2 renal cell carcinoma, clear cell type, kidney cancer. The surgeon told me I was lucky I caught it. If not, I wouldn't have known until I could see the blood in my urine, and at that point I would likely have less than a year to live. After that, I made certain to see my doctors as scheduled, and 4 years after kidney cancer, they caught stage 1 throat cancer, adenocarcinoma, another cancer few people survive if not caught early. This cancer just kept coming back, and it took 6 years of surgery, chemo, and radiation before I was able to hear I'm cancer-free again. Do yourselves a favor and get yearly checkups. First cancer, I was 49. My second, I was 54. Every year, on June 1st, my birthday, I see my oncologist as my birthday present to myself. This year, he shook my hand and congratulated me for making it to my 60th. Told me I was lucky to have survived for 11 years, and few people survive either one of those cancers. Story 32. Stress. Stress freaking murders you, and relatively quickly too. Knew a guy who was an ex-semi-pro tennis player, ran annual marathons, was 44 and in better shape than most 20-year-olds, poster of great physical health, seemingly, dropped dead in line at his favorite coffee shop one morning. Heart attack. He died before he hit the floor. He was a salesman and under constant stress from really vile bosses. On top of that, he was just hemorrhaging money because of a nasty divorce while trying to put one of his 2 girls through college. Never had a real outlet. Just smiled and acted confident/happy all the time. Then me. I used to think intense physical exercise was a suitable outlet for stress. It's not. It builds and festers in your mind like an infected wound of the mind and spirit. I was a champion nakmoe and did bare knuckle a few times in Thailand and Laos, constantly training and eating perfectly. Poor timing with having children I wasn't ready for, and COVID closing down all of the gyms and venues in Thailand, and I lost everything on a couple of bad financial mistakes while taking care of my family and paying hospital bills for my injuries. Add into the mix living in a country that does everything in its power to drain a foreigner of their money, and it becomes almost impossible to float. Living in a state of constant severe anxiety caused my adrenal glands to shut down and ruined my thyroid gland as well. I blew up like a blimp in a year despite diet control and exercise. Fattest I've ever been. Then all my injuries came back threefold. I got hooked on opium and spent 2 years basically in an opium-induced coma, barely able to get out of bed and be a father or husband. Using intravenous drugs was my escape from the insurmountable pressure of having my life do a massive 180 from total success and happiness to almost losing everything in less than a couple of years. Had to sell jewelry, including our wedding rings, some of my late mother's handed-down pieces, just to cover rent and diapers. The stress and anxiety ruined my sleep cycle. I wake up feeling like I have a fever and gasping for air because I hold my breath during my stress dreams. I never get deep restorative sleep. I'm always tired. The stress got so bad at times I lost the ability to get hard despite being young and, quote, healthy. Regular vomiting and the worst migraines imaginable. My panic attacks have gotten so bad that sometimes I will pee in empty water jugs because I'm too scared to leave my room, and it's just impossible to walk down the hallway and confront even my family just to go to the bathroom. I'm searching for real methods for dealing with trauma and stress and not just trying to put band-aids on massive wounds. Learning to properly vent and not stuff crap deep inside and pretend I'm vulnerable. Getting rid of chronic stress is a lifestyle choice, and not just something you can cure with a magic pill or hobby. Get help. Don't let stress eat you up. It will ruin you hard and fast. Letting it come out in the form of completely unhinged mental breakdowns is not okay either. If you find yourself coping with strange behavior or extremely unstable episodes, time to reflect. Start digging out those cancerous mind tumors. Story 33. I was paralyzed the last year from mountain biking. And admittedly, you kind of go into the sport expecting to break something, but not your back. Anyway, here's a list of crap people almost died doing and are now paralyzed, to some degree, some at the neck down, and others, like me, just the legs. Drugs. Fun and games until you jump out of a window or get shot by your dealer. Falling in your kitchen. Falling down the stairs. Walking down the street and getting hit by a truck. Lots of car accidents. trampoline jumping, skateboarding, cycling accidents, one other dude mountain biking, workplace accident at a construction site, lots of diving accidents at both the beach and pool, and a few surgeries that unfortunately didn't go to plan for tumor removal or otherwise, but those are known risks and usually make good recoveries. So, yeah, be careful out there, and wear spine protection if you mountain bike. Story 34. Nitrogen. Although around 79% of the air we breathe, if there's too much of it, the oxygen levels will drop and you can die. While O2 levels are normally around 21% of air, if this number drops to 19%, only 2%, you will quickly pass out. Unless someone comes to get you, you will die. The gas is colorless, odorless, non-flammable, but still ends more than many more intrinsically dangerous chemicals. Also, electricity. Most people know about the normal hazards, but arc flash is no joke and doesn't get mentioned much. If you ever switch a breaker at home, look away, close your eyes, and hold your breath. If something goes wrong inside the switch, there could be an arc that creates your own little temporary sun and vaporize the breaker. Turning away increases survivability, and holding your breath prevents the vaporized copper from entering your lungs. Also, anywhere with equipment, assume the electricity is much more powerful and just don't touch it. Leave that to electricians. On the topic of electricity, many large appliances like computer screens or microwaves have capacitors that can hold charge long after being unplugged. If you take these apart, unplug and leave unplugged for multiple days to allow them to discharge. Even then, be careful around the electronics. Finally, the part of the microwave that produces the waves, the magnetron, often contains beryllium, which will ruin your lungs if breathed in. In short, best if microwaves aren't disassembled. There's a much larger list, but most of all, take things slow. Never be afraid to take a second, step back, and think it through. That advice at the end is pretty applicable to anything. Don't be afraid to take a second, guys. Especially if you're participating in behavior that might be risky, which apparently includes flipping the breaker. I wouldn't have guessed that. Good to know. Story 35. Tanks, but not in the way you think. I grew up in a military town, and one day at school, art class just didn't happen. And the week after that, and after that, until we got a new art teacher a month later. My art teacher had been driving way too close behind a leopard tank doing about 70 kilometers per hour, and the tank driver saw some wild boar bolting across the road. He slammed on the brakes. Emergency braking a tank on asphalt will stop it in about 1.5 vehicle lengths, and lift the back end off the ground pretty far. My art teacher couldn't brake as fast because she was driving a Fiat, so she sort of jammed her car under the back end of the tank, which with the force of about 55 tons descended. Years later, I joined the fire department, and we used photos of that accident for training. The front seat of the car and anything forward of that were under the tank, which was sitting completely level. Clearance under there is about 1 1/3 feet. Story 36. Sucking on the stem of a random plant you pull while walking in nature. If you don't know your plants, this is not a thing you should do. Mainly because hemlock grows by the side of the road and in places that have been disturbed by mankind, such as ditches, fields, overgrown parking lots. Hemlock is invasive in North America and seeds itself readily. Hemlock looks like a wild carrot, but it isn't. If you crush a bit of the leaf, you can smell a very bittersweet smell. It has ended kids who used the stems as straws. The stems are hollow. Some kids, thinking it's a wild carrot, eat a little. That's all it takes. Always be aware of your surroundings. Don't put random plants in your mouth unless you know they're safe. Story 37. I wouldn't say deadlier, but definitely more dangerous than most people would realize. About half of my job is receiving and properly putting away food product in its appropriate storage area on 5 separate levels in a 6-story high building. Usually the storage is nearby the cooking stations, where over 10 professional chefs work vigorously. And since they work at a fast pace, they use code words. For example, a chef yelling, "Corner," means they're walking around a corner with a hot pan. Or "sharp" means they're alerting the person they're passing they're holding a knife. One day while I was putting away a food product, it was maybe my 2nd or 3rd month working there, I could hear a loud voice close behind me shout, "Napalm! Napalm!" Confused, I quickly moved out of the way, and I noticed it was one of the lead chefs in the bakery holding a pan with a boiling bronze liquid, and as soon as they passed, I asked the least busy chef what they meant when they yelled napalm. He explained that boiling hot caramel can act in some way like napalm if it touches any skin, and it's really dangerous. That's why they yelled napalm, and they did that whenever they were walking around with a pot of boiling caramel. Story 38. This one's kind of obvious, but I haven't seen it mentioned yet. The sun. The sun will screw you up, especially if you have natural fair skin. If you insist on tanning for the summer or whatever, please wear sunscreen. Regular tanning will ruin your skin, even over the short term. It's very easy to suffer from heat exhaustion or dehydration from prolonged sun exposure. People often don't even realize it's happening, and it will end you. It happens faster than you think. Many high schools have stories of kids dying from heat exhaustion from sports practice and whatnot. One minute, you and your buddies are playing catch in the sun with your shirts off at the park, and 15 minutes later, your friend is panting on the ground having hallucinations with wide, wild eyes. Forget about skin cancer. Cosmetically speaking, it turns your skin into leather and ages you very quickly, even if you don't get sunburns. I have too many friends in their late 20s with the skin quality of a 50-year-old. No disrespect, just saying. I think everyone agrees that we like our skin to stay nice and healthy and youthful looking. The sun is the antithesis of that. The easiest way to preserve your skin is to avoid excess exposure to the sun. Stay out of the freaking sun, y'all. This feels like another evolution failed us moment, doesn't it? Like, we are creatures that exist on Earth, and as such, we get a fair amount of sun. I guess we just evolved to be in caves or whatever, but I really feel like we should be more resistant to the sun, we're just not. Although it probably does partly depend on genes. Story 39. Not chewing your food well enough. Don't ever dare to think, I can swallow this one, it's not that big. Also, beware of substances like molten cheese. They can prevent you from getting air very quickly, and they can easily slip further down your throat than you would want them to be, at least before you've chewed them down properly. So always keep them in your mouth, controlled with your teeth. Don't hesitate to spit or do whatever necessary to get it out if it happens to slide too far too early. It has been 2 times that because of such a situation, I've been at the point where I thought my life was going to end in a minute. A piece of mozzarella cheese on pizza that was whole and slid down too far blocked my throat/air. And another time, a piece of sausage that seemed small enough to swallow but ended up stuck in my throat. I panicked and thought I was gonna die due to some stupid mistake. Luckily, both removed themselves and I don't know why. Simple luck? Maybe some kind of body function creating an air pressure to get food out? I don't know. But thinking back to these, I'm just happy I survived. Story 40. Since a group of my friends nearly just got ran over, cars. I live out in the country. Sidewalks are not fit for skateboarding or biking. They're so uneven and broken up, especially near trees where the roots have warped the ground under the sidewalk and the village doesn't care enough to fix the nearly 6-inch gap between blocks, or where blocks are missing and there's just gravel. So everyone rides on the shoulder of the road. And this isn't normally a problem because none of the roads are busy. Yet some people think it's funny or a good idea to swerve their cars directly at us. We've had to abandon our boards and run off to the side of the road to avoid getting hit. It's not even like we're on their side of the road either. We're on the shoulder, opposite lane, and they're coming towards us on the other side. A lot of people turn their high beams on and swerve towards us. Then they'll laugh as they drive past. It's scary, and at least one of the kids in our group has been actually hit before. It's so easy to end a life with a car, and I think a lot of people forget that. They're genuinely dangerous with the wrong person behind the wheel. Story 41. More than 5 million people die each year due to contaminated drinking water. Some WHO drinking water statistics are chilling. In 2017, 71% of the global population, that's 5.3 billion people, used a safely managed drinking water service. That is one located on premises, available when needed, and free from contamination. 90% of the global population, 6.8 billion people, used at least a basic service. A basic service is an improved drinking water source within a round trip of 30 minutes to collect water. 785 million people lack even a basic drinking water service, including 144 million people who are dependent on surface water. Globally, at least 2 billion people use a drinking water source contaminated with feces. Contaminated water can transmit diseases such as diarrhea, cholera, dysentery, typhoid, and polio. Contaminated drinking water is estimated to cause 485,000 diarrheal deaths each year. By 2025, half of the world's population will be living in water-stressed areas. In the least developed countries, 22% of healthcare facilities have no water service, 21% no sanitation service, and 22% no waste management service. Story 42. Alcohol consumption has to be the #1 phenomenon bar none when you contrast the extreme degree of negative health effects with broad social permission. I can't think of any other substance or activity or really anything that is so socially approved and so widespread, while also being so incredibly toxic. And I say this as someone who is a fan and certainly drinks more than is healthy. Besides the obvious risk of impairment, the thousands of car crash deaths related to alcohol, and the many crimes that are associated with intoxication moderation, there are a large number of health consequences that receive shockingly little coverage. My understanding is that alcohol use probably causes higher blood pressure, decreased heart health overall, higher risk of stroke, immune system deterioration, liver disease, and other strain on organs, as well as elevated risk of certain cancers. Most people probably have no idea that this is true. Culturally, the minimal and debatable health benefits, wine has antioxidants, seem to be repeated disproportionately far more frequently than the many, many drawbacks. It is a poison, just a very enjoyable one, and a poison that is so integrated into our culture that it's not going away anytime soon. I've wondered if this is going to be like smoking is now, you know? There was huge health pushback, or it still is, of smoking. People figure out it's really bad for you, so they try to get kids to stop doing it. And I feel like there's some of that for alcohol, but not nearly as much. And I wonder, come like 30 years, if people are going to find out alcohol is just as bad and try to push that out too. Or, like Opie says, maybe it's too ingrained in our culture. Story 43. Low head dams, aka dams with a very shallow drop, maybe a few feet. The shorter, the more deadly. The water reaching the bottom creates a hydraulic jump in the water. A small backwash forms called the boil zone, thus preventing anything from escaping. The boil is formed by air being trapped under the water as it falls. Once the air reaches the bottom, it starts to come back up. However, most of the air ends up coming back towards the dam itself in a recirculating current, not away from it. This makes it more deadly as you can't swim in air, so you end up sinking faster than if it was just water, all while constantly being tumbled around in the boil zone with no shallow section to stand on. The worst part is they look exactly like a safe current as well, meaning you can't tell the difference above the surface. Almost all people stuck in one drown, and most of the time they can't send rescue in due to the danger, so they have to wait till the body eventually gets spit out. There's an old video of 3 firefighters rescuing another drowned firefighter, and as the boat approached the boil, it capsized. There was only one survivor. Another scenario was a couple kayaking. They both went over a 1-foot drop and the kayaks could not escape the boil and turned over. Both drowned. Conclusion: never swim under or go over a small dam for fun or in a kayak unless you check them out ahead of time. It's impossible to tell the difference between a safe and dangerous one unless tested. Throw an object in it. If the object stays in one spot, you'll die. If the object continues downstream, you're good to go. Story 44. Hiking in dry, hot climates. I live in Utah and did some summers as a whitewater rafting guide. People would come in from hot climates and thought they knew better because they were from 40 degrees Celsius climates or whatever. Well, the nasty thing about here is it's a bone-dry heat, so you sweat, but you stay dry. People from humid areas have a hard time associating being dry with sweating massive amounts of water, and once you hit a certain point, your body doesn't even sweat anymore. A big mistake tourists will make other than water is they get hot and tired, so they look for shade. They sit down, or worse, lie down. On a 46 degrees Celsius day, like yesterday, the ground can be 16 degrees hotter than the air. They dehydrate themselves, lie down, bake their brains, and never get back up. If you're in 40 degree plus Celsius dry heat, and you're not peeing clear yellow every hour on the hour, you're headed for trouble. 1 liter per person per hour of full sun. If you have access to shady resting places, 4 liters will get you through a 12-hour day. But you're not going to be very happy about it, and you should avoid trails where a stumble could end you. Story 45. Head traumas, concussions, and CTE. I know it's getting a lot more attention these days, but I still see kids in my neighborhood without helmets while riding bikes, scooters, skateboards, and everything else with wheels. It's not just major accidents either. Small damage can build up over time, causing memory loss, short temper, irritability, and a host of other issues that are hard to trace to one single event. There is also little you can do to regenerate the damaged brain tissue, at least as far as I'm aware. This can lead to wanting to take your own life, and in extreme cases, always wear your helmet. Always seek medical attention after a hard fall or knock to the head. Rest after concussion and drink lots of fluid. Not sleeping is an old wives' tale. The new recommendation is for lots and lots of sleep immediately. If someone you know or witness gets knocked unconscious, no matter what, make sure they're seen by a medical professional. I know much of this from experience, I think. Who knew the symptoms of head trauma were so similar to the symptoms of playing League of Legends? In all seriousness, guys, wear your helmets. Head injuries are no joke. Neither is League of Legends. Story 46. Surgery. People go for routine and elective surgeries all the time to fix small inconveniences in their life. Surgeons can send patients for surgery with talk about risks and benefits as if humans aren't demonstrably terrible at understanding odds. Surgical complications can range from minimal to profoundly morbid or downright mortal. Don't mistake me. Surgery is an enormously beneficial service, but it's also more deadly than most people realize. An example is bariatric surgery, particularly gastric bypass. Again, don't get me wrong. A lot of people have benefited from it. The field is supported by a vast number of published articles that overstate the benefits and understate the risks, however. First and foremost, morbid obesity is a major risk factor for any operation requiring general anesthesia. The complications of rearranging the intestinal tract are bizarre and often specific to the nuances of an individual's surgical outcome. These patients receive an inordinate number of CT scans. Radiation is good, right? Whenever they need emergent evaluation, which is often. These patients often have comorbid psychiatric conditions, often undiagnosed, and become dependent on medications for nausea and or pain. They develop bowel obstructions, ulcers, strictures requiring intervention or reoperation. So I would argue that surgery, particularly bariatric surgery, is more dangerous and deadly than most folks realize. Story 47. Tattoos. There's a huge trend right now on TikTok with kids buying machines off Amazon and tattooing themselves and each other. There's a reason I had to be apprenticed under a master tattooer for 3 years, as well as take several medical courses and get several medical safety certifications before I could even apply for my body modification license. Hepatitis, staph infections, fatal sepsis, it all happens. Right when I first started, a local scratcher, the name for unlicensed tattoo enthusiasts buying machines online and tattooing in their house with no sanitation, just like these TikTok kids, gave someone a crappy hand tattoo. It was infected so badly, the hand degloved. That is, the infection detached the skin from his entire hand, and one day, it all slipped off like a fine silk glove. He's disfigured and disabled forever over a crappy tattoo of a spider. I'll never forget the photos all the artists were showing us apprentices. I wish I had them saved so I could show them to anyone doing this. Pathogens are everywhere constantly. They're all over your skin right now. You can literally give someone a staph infection by touching their upper arm, then touching the tattoo you're doing on their stomach, because different areas of the skin have different bacteria, and now you've injected that bacteria under the skin 1,000 times a minute with a needle. Even if you think you're disinfecting, you're not. It's little bits of knowledge that count, like the fact that you can't disinfect safely with isopropyl alcohol because it evaporates too quickly to end pathogens. There's a fine mist of blood and fluids getting shot into the air by the intense action of tattooing someone. Now it's on your clothes, your face, your hair, your tattoo chair, your floor, all the cords and wires, likely your entire setup. It's uncovered because you don't know to cover it all in disposable film. Hepatitis B survives outside of the body for 7 days. Now you have a client come the next day and wipe down their fresh tattoo with one of those contaminated paper towels. Congratulations, they now have hepatitis B. Come on, kids. There's a reason tattoo artists have 5 or so different certifications on the wall when you walk in. You can end someone's life. More likely, you'll maim them. It takes a real lucky streak not to infect a tattoo when you don't have any training. Story 48. Heavy, slow-moving things. Inertia is a thing, folks, and you're not as heavy or strong as you think you are. Working in a factory once, they were changing out the big injection molding die. There's a big winch and motorized system to move this thing across the floor to the right station. So it's moving across the floor, gets to the end of the hall, but the person on the controls overshoots it a little. One of the guys been working there for years, so really should have known better, reaches up a hand to stop the die from hitting the wall. You know, just casually push it away a little. Lost 3 of his fingers, and damned lucky he didn't lose the whole hand. Objects that are heavy tend to keep moving in whichever direction they're going. This is horrifying because, that internal reaction you have to just grab something when it's gonna hit something else, like how unless you've really drilled it in your head, you might at least start to reach for a falling knife or something to grab it, just if you're not thinking or something, right? You really gotta realize what you're doing at all times when you're working with stuff like this. Story 49. Chronic pain. Chronic pain causes huge stress on the body, especially when not treated properly. So the person gets a little sleep and is not able to function because the pain is too severe. They did a study where they took 3,000 people and 1,500, their opiate medication was cut. The other 1,500 stayed on it. Well, in 3 years of those who stayed on, 10% died. Those who were taken off, 30% died in 3 years. Doctors today tell you to just take NSAID or Motrin type medications for chronic pain, but that can cause bleeding ulcers, GERD, and heart damage. Basically, those types of drugs are far more dangerous when taken as prescribed than when opiates are taken as prescribed. Opiates are fairly safe if started on a small dose and used only for physical pain instead of recreationally or abused to escape from reality. Dependency is not the same as addiction, and many drugs can cause withdrawal symptoms just because you've been on them a certain time. Addiction is when that drug basically controls your life as far as relationship, finances, job performance, health, and even death. Any addiction can cause that, whether it's alcohol, drugs, power, gambling, banging, whatever. Drug abuse is a mental illness, and just taking medication away from the severely disabled is not going to fix the problem, since 80% of those who get addicted start before 25 years old, and most people who are being prescribed are over 50 years old, which have the smallest rate of abuse. 85% of opiate abuser and addicts never got a prescription from a doctor before in their life. The one thing you cannot have with opiates is alcohol, and most people die from a mixture of multiple drugs than just taking one type. Story 50. Literally everything. Somehow we humans can choke on our own spit. Hell, one time I choked on nothing at all, just the intense mint flavor of my gum. One perfectly aimed fall down the stairs and you're a goner. Oh, stairs don't even need to be involved. If your head hits concrete with just enough force, you're dead. You could have only tripped or fell off a bike. Wearing a helmet? Well, maybe something caught you by the neck. Malicious people sometimes string tensioned wire across a bike/snowmobile trails. I'm not sure which would give me more odds of living, a thick cable or a thin one. The thin one might snap, or it might slice clean through. And then there are allergies. We don't know what everyone is allergic to, and they have to be vigilant their whole lives. There isn't a pill they can just take to allow them to eat peanuts. Then, as if all those external factors weren't enough, there's depression and resultant people taking their own lives. We are literally hurting ourselves. Maybe it's stress. Maybe it's the feeling that there's no other way, but someone saw that as their best solution and took it. Everything is more deadly than we think. Memento mori. Yeah, man, the allergy one is messed up. Like, what do you mean the milk of a cow will end my life? Why? What did I do wrong? Why does my body specifically hate this thing that so many other people can ingest with no problems? And hey, guess what? For me, it's not even lactose. I can have lactose. People think, oh, you can't have milk. Oh, this is lactose free. No. I can actually have lactose. It's casein and whey that do me in, man. But why? Why are my cells like this? Anyway, rant over. Story 51. Eating larger quantities of Brazil nuts is stupid dangerous. Learned this firsthand. They can cause your liver to shut down very quickly and cause heart attacks. These little guys have selenium in them, healthy in small quantities, but on average, just 28 grams of Brazil nuts contains 988% of the referenced daily intake. One nut contains 96 to 400 mc of selenium. 5,000 mc has a very good chance of ending your life. I ate 500 grams of these while studying, being too lazy to go to the store. A couple of minutes after I finished the bag, I started having trouble breathing. I got up, became extremely hot in a flash, and got a cramp in my chest. I'm young and relatively healthy, but my body was in fight or flight mode. I think because of the adrenaline, my mind just cleared up. Because I've never really had any allergies, I googled Brazil nut poisonous, found the information and called the poison hotline. I explained my symptoms and told him about the selenium toxicity. He had no idea it was even a thing. He's panicking, so I calmed him down and hung up. I called the ambulance while opening all the doors in my place and laid down on my bed. By the time I got to the hospital, I was breathing better and they got me on a drip. I explained to them how many I ate and what I read online. Well, they diagnosed me with a nut allergy and sent me on my way. Story 52. Vaping. It's said to be, quote, safer and less dangerous than cigarettes, but it's still not good for you. It's dangerous at long term, and only a few doses can be fatal if not used carefully. My brother passed out at a party one year after he was handed a vape with an incredible amount of nicotine in it. Probably something else, too. Vaping won't end you, but it can cause damage to your brain's development and screw your lungs. Also, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, by early 2020 there had been a total of 2,807 hospitalizations or deaths from vaping. Even though e-cigarettes were first meant to help people stop smoking, they also ruin others. Addiction is one of the many problems nicotine can cause. It's hard to stop and it can influence your mental health and behavior, which can lead to depression and other stuff. Story 53. As much as I hate to say it, dogs. I work with them, and just today I had my ponytail yanked so hard I almost cracked pavement. Mild concussion. Luckily, the dog wasn't trying to end me, and I responded quickly, but his lack of training and play biting could have easily been fixed with a little time and effort. Train your dogs, people, especially large ones. They're not accessories, they're animals with a deadly power, even if it's not on purpose. Even if you, quote, know how to handle them, a stranger won't. A child won't, and you'll be watching your little buddy walk that rainbow bridge before their time. A dog also broke my mother's finger beyond repair. Don't encourage biting or jumping, even in a playful manner. Do not try to, quote, show them you're the alpha or whatever the hell. Do not respond to aggression with aggression. Either hire a professional or do the research. Story 54. When you put all your strength into lifting an object, from the feeling you get, you might think, ugh, this is how heavy things get. But there is no limit to mechanical forces, or any physical forces really. There are machines that will crush a human's body parts without any effort at all. This goes not just for machines, but for things falling down, you maybe getting an arm stuck somewhere and then falling down. All kinds of stupid things can seriously injure you, especially unfortunate levers/leverages. Stay away from heavy machinery, or at least be extremely careful when you are near it. You wouldn't believe how easy it is to die due to stupid mistakes. Machines and physics don't give a crap about you. Things just happen. You get a shock and the next thing you know, you're lucky if you even wake up. Story 55. Swimming pools at your house. Most especially if you have young children. From the CDC. Quote, children ages 1 to 4 have the highest drowning rates. In 2014, among children 1 to 4 years old who died from an unintentional injury, 1/3 died from drowning. Among children ages 1 to 4, most drownings occur in home swimming pools. Drowning is responsible for more deaths among children 1 to 4 than any other cause, except congenital anomalies, birth defects. Among those 1 to 14, fatal drowning remains the second leading cause of unintentional injury-related death behind motor vehicle crashes. End quote. Now consider that only a small number, Google suggests less than 5% of homes, have a pool, so most of those drownings are coming from a minority of households. As a parent, you're inclined to worry about more sensational dangers like kidnapping. But if you have a pool and a young child, the pool poses orders of magnitude more danger to your child than a stranger kidnapping them. In fact, it poses more danger to your child than everything else in their life. A family member of mine had their 5-year-old drown in their ground pool. Tragically, the parent was in the pool at the time cleaning it. They were faced away from where the child fell in. It takes no time at all for a child to drown. Story 56. Rat crap. I didn't have to go to the ER, but it was scary. I was staying on a friend's couch for a few months and decided to make a room for myself in the garage with tarp walls and a cot. One day, my boyfriend thought he identified the smell of rat feces. I didn't smell anything. Took a nap in there the next day and woke up with the weirdest feeling in my throat and some mild difficulty breathing. And I could smell it. Really bad. Stayed at his house that night, and by the next day, I felt like total crap. It almost felt like my lungs and throat were closing up. These are the early symptoms of hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, the virus transmitted from rats to humans via crap. I've read of it having a mortality rate of 38 and 50%. Not sure which is true, but either way, it's not something you want. It can start to shut down vital organs. Story 57. EMP, electromagnetic pulse. This can come in the form of a nuclear detonation above the atmosphere or a solar event. We're due for a major solar event. Many argue overdue based on historical data of solar activity. Of course, international tensions present troubling possibilities as well. In the end, we don't hear much about it, and the electrical grid is not equipped to handle these events. If/when such an event occurs, it's essentially an SHTF scenario. Not good to a catastrophic and society-shattering degree. The reason EMPs didn't curb everything in the past is because society at that time wasn't built entirely around electricity. Now, almost everything. Cars, almost everything we use, refrigerators, manufacturing equipment, pacemakers, hospitals, energy facilities including solar and wind, the internet, etc., is predicated on electricity. The last major event, not major like the 1989 event, happened in 1859, over 160 years ago. If that happened today, which we're due for, it would take 4 to 10 years to recover. Currently, the ability to manufacture transformers where power isn't cut off is an extremely specialized endeavor which takes over a year, let alone the need to build way more than one. Let us hope this is realized by the people who can make us less vulnerable soon. Story 58. Thyroid cancer. I posted this in response to an earlier comment regarding thyroid disorders, but want more people to see it. Important heads up regarding thyroid cancer, not trying to one-up the OP. My younger sister and I have an extremely rare genetic genetic disorder that predisposes us to certain types of GI tract cancers. I just had my 45th surgery, including 5 in the last year, age 52. My sister has had over 70. Thyroid cancer is often caused by radiation exposure, and we've had countless scans of all types. When I was 36, my primary doc retired, and when I found a new one, he did a full physical that included checking my thyroid by running his fingers over my thyroid gland. This is how I found out I had stage 4 thyroid cancer that entered a lymph node. No doctor had ever done that before, and it was only dumb luck that my doc retiring led me to this new guy. My sister was found to have it last year the same way but caught earlier. We both had total thyroidectomy and radiation and survived, but it was the closest to ending me of all the cancers I've had. Multiple intestinal and GI, lung, stomach, etc. Please ask your doctor to do this test. It is non-invasive, simple, and quick. Many docs simply don't include it as part of a routine physical. Finding it early is the key since it murders you by spreading through the lymph system, and then cancer just shows up everywhere. Bones, organs, skin. Story 59. Electricity, more specifically the North American, and to be even more specific, the US's electrical system. I know the US isn't the only country to use Type A and B electric plugs, but goddamn are they scary. The device in question only needs to be slightly in for the connection to be completed, and now you could touch live 120 volts. What's scarier is the amount of older homes in the US that aren't up to code because the wiring is grandfathered in. For example, my upstairs house has ungrounded 20 amp outlets and only has one GFCI outlet in the bathroom. The rest of the upstairs has 4 out of the 9 outlets grounded, not to mention extension cords. Most of them are not rated to handle 15 amps continuously, yet so many people do that. To top it all off, the circuit breaker in your house if you live in the US has a 99% chance of not catching any issue if the issue is caused by an extension cord, because as far as the breaker is concerned, everything inside the outlet is operating fine. Be very careful when using Type A and B electric plugs, people. They can be scary. Story 60. If we're talking about raw numbers, dogs are far deadlier than most people realize, specifically because dogs can carry rabies. In Western countries, we don't really think about it because rabies deaths are basically zero. However, in poor countries like India and most of Central Africa, bites from rabid dogs end upwards of 25,000 lives per year. I suppose a distinction could be made that the dogs themselves aren't really the cause. In fact, the number of people ended by dog bites directly per year is less than 30. However, the number one source of rabies infections globally is dogs by a wide margin. The issue is so serious in some Indian cities that local governments have had to hire full-time workers to hunt down and end stray dogs. Story 61. Punches. Nose punches? Your nose is an incredibly complicated structure full of hundreds of little cavities and tiny bone pieces. Inside the nose, there's a vertical lamina of bone that divides the left part from the right, and it goes from above your mouth's roof all the way up to the very base of the cranium. The cranium confines directly with the nose. Sometimes they perform brain surgery through it. Where the cranium meets the nose cavity, it's made up of a tiny, ridiculous layer of bone, the upper limit of the main nasal cavity. It's as thin as a few paper sheets, and full of tiny, tiny holes to let some brain cells dangle down into the nasal cavity to feel smells. You punch someone in the nose with the wrong angle, and the vertical lamina will shatter and be pushed backwards and upwards, going right through that little bone on your cranium and stabbing your brain. Brain damage from that is often ridiculous, but the nose's main purpose is literally to get dirty as hell to clean the air you're breathing, while your brain has to be sterile. You'll develop brain infection, meningitis, and die within days. Also, that area is crazily vascularized, full of blood cells. It will bleed so much you could literally drown in your own blood. Medical procedures literally say that before you can intubate a patient with a broken nose or skull base bleeding, you have to be sure you can do it in a few seconds, or when you open their airways to do it, they'll have a crap ton of blood going into their lungs. If you survive drowning from it, blood in your lungs will certainly lead to lung infection, often very severe. These punches are so dangerous they're banned in all combat sports, like boxing or martial arts. Also, chin punches. If you punch horizontally, you'll break your opponent's jaw, but not if you punch upwards. The jaw is built to withstand a lot of force in that direction, and teeth are super hard. That way, all the force will go to making your cranium quickly move upwards. Your brain is not attached to it. It's floating in brain fluid inside of it, and it will not follow its movement without a significant delay. Your brain will hit the inside of your skull really hard, and brain bleeding is nothing to joke about. Head punches will easily end you, but even if it's not hard enough to do that, if you fall backwards and bang your head just right, you're gone in a second. It really takes much less than people realize. Chest punches can break ribs, and ribs bend toward the inside when they break, meaning they can puncture lungs and big blood vessels. A punctured lung will collapse on itself in a matter of minutes, requiring intensive medical care and possibly surgery, other than being at an incredibly high risk of developing infections and blood clots. The last ribs down can stab your kidneys, liver, or spleen, and all of those 3 organs are basically sponges full of blood that will bleed like crazy. Having one of those 3 punctured, especially the spleen, can easily make you die of internal bleeding. Front punches on the chest will compress your heart, and the heart really does not like that kind of stress. Heart bruising often leads to heart failure. Throat punches will bend and break the cartilage structure on your trachea. Bleeding in your upper airways could very easily end up in your lungs, and lungs really don't like having blood in them. Instant lung infection that will require days, possibly weeks in the hospital. Blood is very sticky, so it's hard to cough up if the bleeding is too far down. Gut punches can make various organs bruise. Those organs are almost always in motion. If they swell up, you will not be able to properly eat and process food, and could end up with serious complications like intestinal blocks. Punches on the center of your back can damage your spine, and on the side, they can break ribs and hit your kidneys. Kidneys are floating in fat tissue up there. They can move and shift and do all sorts of crap. They will get bruised, and it's not funny. Losing a kidney is really not that hard. Also, fun fact, big bones, especially the long bones in your limbs, have huge arteries attached to them. The humerus has the brachial artery, and the femur has the femoral artery. The femoral is gigantic, and the brachial is smaller, but very close to the heart, so very pressurized. Breaking one of those bones is quite likely to end up injuring one of those arteries. Look out for bruising or swelling sensations if you break your arm or leg. Murdering or seriously injuring someone solely by punching them is far easier than most people realize. Once you've ended a life, you're a murderer, and there's no going back. Do not engage in fights, especially if you're physically bigger than your opponent and if you don't know what you're doing and how to avoid serious injuries. Or prepare to have your life thrown down a crap hole. Source: I'm in nursing school and my anatomy teacher loved to tell us how easy it is to end a life. Spoiler: very, very easy. Story 62. Choking. I think lots of people who wouldn't consider themselves particularly frisky or particularly extreme will put a hand completely over a partner's mouth or on their throat. The foremost experts on this subject, a former EMT, legal scholar, and a martial artist, lay out convincing arguments that those acts, A, can cause unanticipatable death within seconds no matter the technique because of the parasympathetic nervous system and the Valsalva effect, B, most judges and juries hand down harsh penalties for those who harm or end lives through choking during banging because it has zero perceived benefit to society or the individual's well-being, and C, that arguments about the documented safety of chokeholds in martial arts contexts, and he lays out his reasoning that this also applies to things like gas masks, devices, techniques for safer choking, don't really apply to intimate choking. This is a honker of a read, but I think everyone who wants to engage in or defend choking or suffocating a partner during banging or defend it should read it first. I found it very well reasoned and convincing. TLDR, a little light choking of your girlfriend can result in much more death and much more prison time than you would have imagined. Story 63. The two that always come to mind are icicles and cows. The first because not every area has them, but apparently they take out 15 Americans every year and about 100 Russians. Now, they look deadly, but also they're just out of the way enough that most people don't pay them any attention. Now, I would have said cows because they come up a lot when downplaying the severity of shark attacks. Cows end approximately 20 people's lives per year, though only a third of those are intentional. But while looking that up, I found that mosquitoes actually end approximately 1 million people a year. So if I can cheat and add a third, it would be mosquitoes. Those suckers are really nasty, but I definitely didn't realize how deadly they were until looking into the cow thing. These are all my opinions, though. Who knows, maybe black ice is more lethal than icicles, but I am actively aware of the threat black ice poses. Icicles, however, aren't even on my mind until I spotted the post. I also wonder how much worse these things are because surely not every incident gets reported. Think mosquitoes take the lead, oddly enough. OP, what do you mean, oddly enough? Mosquitoes I thought were pretty well known to be very deadly. Sure, not so much in the Western world, but in places with less developed medical procedures where malaria runs rampant, yeah, they are absolutely running wild. In a bad way. Story 64. .22 caliber guns and bullets. Before you raise an eyebrow at me for stating the obvious, yes, it should not be a surprise to anyone that guns are deadly, but a perhaps surprising statistic is that the .22 is the deadliest caliber in the world. For those not well versed in firearms, the .22 is one of the smallest calibers there is, and is fired out of often very small handguns. Think like the James Bond up-the-sleeve tiny spy gun, the Walther P22 in that example. These guns often have very little recoil, which makes them feel less powerful or serious than the person firing it might realize, and so are much more deadly than a lot of owners might assume. My dad worked in law enforcement, and he has seen a heartbreaking number of cases where a couple of old friends got in a stupid fight, or someone wanted to show off how cool they were at a party, and ended up waving around a .22 pistol that they underestimated the deadliness of. Guns don't have to be big or flashy or loud to be deadly. A hole just a couple of millimeters wide in your body will end your life, just the same as a larger hole or explosive shrapnel or ugly hollow point entry or anything else. Take your firearms seriously, folks. Edit to add that the .22 is also a very common caliber, so that probably plays into the statistic as well. But it's the only caliber my dad said he's seen so many cases of being responsible for an unintended death, specifically because of being underestimated. Unlike other common calibers like 38 or 45 or 9mm, people don't treat this as seriously or carefully or intentionally. Story 65. I feel like rabies might sound like a stupid answer, but most people don't realize that by the time you start showing symptoms, it's already too late. It is 100% lethal without early treatment. Not even Ebola can boast that mortality rate. Most will slowly die in an agonizing, delirious state as their brains die due to neuron overstimulation. The animals you should really avoid are skunks, raccoons, foxes, and bats. Any mammal can contract and transmit rabies past a certain point, though, so it's safer to just go get treatment immediately if you're bitten by something. It's now quite a painless series of injections, and always better to be safe than sorry. Disclaimer: rabies has only ended a few dozen people in the last couple of decades in the US, but may murder as many as 50,000 people per year worldwide. Story 66. Sillet Bang. I'm very small, so to clean the bath I have to get in. We live in an area that has high limescale, so whilst the kids were at school, I thought I would clean the limescale off the shower. I opened the window and door to the bathroom, but didn't think about the fact that the shower screen enclosed me from the breeze. After about 15 minutes, I started to feel odd, so I got out and headed out of the bathroom and had a banging headache, shortness of breath, the whirlies. Luckily, my phone was near, so I phoned a mum friend saying I was feeling really ill. She picked up my kids for me and brought them round, by which time I had managed to army crawl down the stairs to get to the door. As soon as I opened the door to let her and the kids in, the fumes from the bathroom hit her. She managed to sort me out, get the house opened up, and stayed with me until I felt better. By the time my husband came home, I was feeling a bit better and vowed to never use Sillet Bang again. When it says to well ventilate, that doesn't just mean open a window. This really goes for any sort of cleaning product, doesn't it? Or anything that can be quite gaseous. Fumes will absolutely get you, no matter what they're attached to. I find it odd that OP says they vowed to never use it again, when they also note that it says to well ventilate, and that they didn't really do that. Like, don't get me wrong, scary and all, but also user error, I think. Story 67. Cavities. Recently I had a major cavity on one of my molars and not only caused calcification of my pulp, but it also caused an infection. Before I noticed it was infected, I had gone to the dentist and I was given some ibuprofen for the pain. Later that day while I was at work, my bottom lip started to go numb. This worried me, but I waited to see if it would go away. After a few hours it did, but while I was heading home later that night it went numb again and stayed numb for the next few days. When I woke up the next day, I noticed that I had a very sore spot on the bottom of my chin. I brushed this off as just some random soreness, though. Then it started swelling, and my father takes me to urgent care. They tell me I've got an infection and put me on antibiotics. The next day, the swelling gets worse. We decide to give the antibiotics another day, though. We wait, and the swelling is absolutely terrible. Half my chin was basically 2.5 times bigger than normal. I can't speak or swallow without pain. I go to my dentist as an emergency patient. My dentist puts me on more antibiotics, and I'm told to come back the next day. We return, and the swelling has gone down slightly, but it was still really bad. At this point, my dentist sends me to an oral surgery place, and the doctors there become very worried about me and consider sending me to the emergency room. This was because they said the swelling had spread to my neck. They instead choose to call in their own surgeon, and he basically explains to me that he can pull my tooth and drain the infection through that. He said I would have to get it done that day because with how it was spreading, it would very likely close off my airway in the next couple of days and suffocate me. I, of course, got the surgery done, and I'm supposed to be getting a tooth implant 3 months from now. Brush your teeth, people. Story 68. Mixing any of these common household products. 1. Hydrogen peroxide and vinegar. This results in peracetic acid, which is corrosive. 2. Ammonia and bleach. This will produce vapors that can cause throat burns and respiratory damage. 3. Vinegar and bleach. The acid in vinegar releases toxic chlorine and chloramine vapors when added to bleach, and those vapors can cause chemical burns to eyes and lungs. 4. Bleach and rubbing alcohol, isopropyl. This results in chloroform, which maybe isn't deadly by itself, but does put you at risk. 5. Lysol and bleach. The bleach oxidizes some of the components of the cleaning agent, resulting in various irritating and toxic compounds. 6. Dish soap and bleach. This results in, you guessed it, a toxic gas. I know some of them are way deadlier than others on the list, but all of them do put you in danger. Be careful out there. Story 70. Not taking wisdom teeth seriously. When I was around 22, I had pain in the back molars, and my dentist told me it was due to the wisdom teeth growing in. Just wait it out. And they even said they'll never come through, and I won't have to worry about them as they supposedly stop growing after you reach 20 or 21. As the years went by, I didn't particularly notice any difference other than when they would grow once in a while, and then eventually it stopped, which I thought was great. I wasn't able to get dental coverage due to being jobless, and the pain came back, but more severe. I hadn't visited a dentistry in years until last December when I was 28, as I was finally able to afford it, and I went with a new one which had panoramic x-rays. My old one didn't. Apparently the third molar nerve was dead and the mandible's second molar nerves were half toast. And the reason was, as the wisdom tooth grew in on an angle, it pushed against the molar and it decayed underneath the gum, causing an abscess. The reason the pain was so bad is because the abscess grew to the point of it bursting, which caused a pretty severe infection. He extracted the wisdom teeth and performed a root canal right after that, so it was one heck of a day. But even after having it removed, taking antibiotics, strong painkillers, the pain worsened until I got sepsis 2 days later. I'm fine now, but at the time I wished I just got them removed before I was laid off. And I plan to keep on top of cleanings and checkups. Not everyone needs their wisdom teeth out, but if at any moment you suspect you should get them pulled, especially if you have the money, I would go with your gut. It'll save money and pain in the long run. Story 71. Hand, foot, and mouth disease. It occurs commonly in young children, but adults can also get it. Most common symptoms are cold-like symptoms, tiredness, sore throat, blisters on tongue, hands, feet, and in the mouth. Some very young children may need to be hospitalized and tube-fed if the blisters in the mouth and throat are severe enough. In rare cases, it can cause other deadly conditions if not treated quickly and appropriately, including pericarditis, which is inflammation of the pericardium, the protective sac around your heart, and it'll cause a fluid buildup between the pericardium and your actual heart. This can cause undue pressure in the heart, resulting in palpitations, rhythm problems, and sometimes death. Unfortunately, I got pericarditis from hand, foot, and mouth after being exposed to the virus at work, a hospital emergency department, and it was so severe I required ICU admission and complete bed rest for just under 5 weeks. As a result, I've been left with other heart conditions associated with pericarditis, including recurrent pericarditis, part thickening of the pericardium, and atrial fibrillation. Story 72. Doctors don't tell you what can go wrong with a failed VBAC, vaginal birth after cesarean. They say 1 in 100 fail. When you think about it, that's a pretty high rate. When they fail, the uterus ruptures, and so does anything in the scar tissue that developed after the previous cesarean is attached to. If doctors don't catch it soon enough, mom and baby won't survive. When I had a son, I was told I would be a good candidate for VBAC. I actually wasn't. The doctor never checked with ultrasound to see if I had scar tissue attached anywhere that shouldn't have been. Turns out I had scar tissue attached to my bladder. When my uterus ruptured, it took my bladder and cervix with it. I was in labor for 15 hours and I don't know how much of that had left my son swimming in my blood and urine. In that time, I only used the restroom once, when I got to the hospital. I was only wheeled into an emergency cesarean because my son's heart rate dropped and they couldn't get it back up. That's how they had found out that I had ruptured. If he'd had his first poop while still floating in all that blood around him, I hate to think what would have happened to us both. As it was, he was unresponsive for 4 minutes and I was on the operating table for 3 hours. We both spent a week in the hospital. Story 73. Texting while driving. Recent U.S. survey. 2,841 people lost their lives in car crashes linked to distracted driving in 2018 alone. 385 people died in car crashes linked to texting while driving in 2018. 1.6 million crashes happen every year because of someone using a phone while driving. About 14% of all fatal crashes involve some sort of cell phone use. Around 390,000 injuries happen yearly from accidents caused by texting and driving. Distracted driving was responsible for 8.5% of all fatal motor vehicle crashes in 2019. 1 out of 4 car accidents in America are caused by texting and driving. You are 24 times more likely to crash your car if you start texting while you're driving. 202 teens aged 15 to 19 lost their lives due to texting and driving in 2018. Car insurance premiums have increased up to almost 10,000% due to distracted driving. Story 74. Arguments between couples in a relationship or a marriage can turn disastrous very quickly. In the heat of an argument, violence over disagreements or spats about anything is far too prevalent. So often a woman will get physical. The male in the argument often strikes back, not being cognizant of his strength advantage compared to his female counterpart. That is when so many females are badly injured, or worse, accidentally lose their lives. In the end analysis, so many men end up serving long prison sentences for striking a woman after being in an argument turned violent. I think males must realize that no matter how angry they are, or even if struck first by their partner, they must leave the scene immediately. A cool-off period is needed. If arguments in relationships or marriages often turn to violence, both parties involved should seriously think about ending the relationship or marriage. Life is too short to be in constant conflict with the main person in your life anyway. I've heard many men say, if she hits me, I'm hitting back for sure. Unless you're looking to spend time in prison, you have to change your way of thinking. Story 76. Eating too fast. I just learned about the Hemlock maneuver when I was in elementary school, and the next day my brother Ant and I, 5, 8, 7 years old, were sitting at the table. He wanted to go watch TV, so he started scarfing down his taquitos. The adult left the room for 5 minutes to answer a call. My brother started to make gagging sounds, and I looked up from my meal trying to figure out if he was trying to get attention from us. My aunt and I were across the table, but we watched him for a long moment before it clicked in my head. I ran around the table and pulled his chair out before giving him the Heimlich. I remembered to press just under the ribcage and not the actual ribcage, and out popped an inch of his taquito. As soon as it came out, I let him go and moved back to sit down like nothing happened. A few minutes later, the adult walked back into my brother, who was red in the face, and my aunt in a daze as I was casually eating. I think I was in just as much shock as them, but I didn't know what to say at the time. This is a great example of why teaching children these things is super important. Children can save lives too. It's not impossible that if OP wasn't ready with this knowledge, that their brother would have just lost his life that day. Horrifying to think about, and happily not the reality. Story 77. Copy pasta warning. Rabies. It's exceptionally common, but people just don't run into the animals that carry it often. Skunks especially, and bats. Let me paint you a picture. You go camping, and at midday you decide to take a nap in a nice little hammock. While sleeping, a tiny brown bat in the rage stages of infection is fidgeting in broad daylight. Uncomfortable and thirsty due to the hydrophobia, and you snort, startling him. As such, he goes into attack mode. Except you're asleep and he's a little brown bat, so weighs around 6 grams. You don't even feel him land on your bare knee and he starts to bite. His teeth are tiny, hardly enough to break the skin, but he does manage to give you the equivalent of a tiny scrape that goes completely unnoticed. Rabies doesn't travel in your blood. In fact, a blood test won't even tell you if you've got it. Antibody tests may be done, but are useless if you've ever been vaccinated. You wake up none the wiser. If you notice anything at the bite site at all, you assume you just lightly scraped it. The bomb has been lit, and your nervous system is the wick. The rabies will multiply along your nervous system, doing virtually no damage and completely undetectable. You have literally no symptoms. It may be 4 days, it may be a year, but the camping trip is most likely long forgotten. Then one day your back starts to ache, or maybe you get a slight headache. At this point, you're already dead. There is no cure. The sole caveat to this is the Milwaukee Protocol, which leaves most patients dead anyway, and the survivors mentally disabled. This is seldom done. There's no treatment. It has a 100% fatality rate. Absorb that. Not a single other virus on the planet has a 100% mortality rate. Only rabies. And once you're symptomatic, it's over. You're dead. So what does that look like? Your headache turns into a fever, and a general feeling of being unwell. You're fidgety, uncomfortable, and scared. As the virus that has taken its time getting into your brain finds a vast network of nerve endings, it begins to rapidly reproduce, starting at the base of your brain. This part of the brain, your pons, is the part that controls communication between the rest of the brain and the body, as well as sleep cycles. Next, you become anxious. You still think you only have a mild fever, but suddenly, you find yourself becoming scared, even horrified. It doesn't occur to you that you don't know why. This is because the rabies is chewing up your amygdala. As your cerebellum becomes hot with the virus, you begin to lose muscle coordination and balance. You think maybe it's a good idea to go to the doctor now, but assuming a doctor is smart enough to run the tests necessary in the few days you have left on the planet, odds are they'll only be able to tell your loved ones what you died of later. You're twitchy, shaking, and scared. You have the normal fear of not knowing what's going on, but with the virus really screwing the amygdala, this is amplified 100-fold. It's around this time the hydrophobia starts. You're horribly thirsty, you just want water, but you can't drink. Every time you do, your throat clamps shut and you vomit. This has become a legitimate, active fear of water. You're thirsty, but looking at a glass of water begins to make you gag and shy back in fear. The contradiction is hard for your hot brain to see at this point. By now, the doctors will have put you on IVs to keep you hydrated, but even that's futile. After all, you were dead the second you had a headache. You begin hearing things, or not hearing at all, as your thalamus goes. You taste sounds, you see smells, everything starts feeling like the most horrifying acid trip anyone has ever been on. With your hippocampus long under attack, you're having trouble remembering things, especially family. You're alone, hallucinating, thirsty, confused, and absolutely undeniably terrified. Everything scares the literal crap out of you at this point. These strange people in lab coats, these strange people standing around your bed crying who keep trying to get you to drink something, and it's only been about a week since that little headache that you've completely forgotten about. Time means nothing to you anymore. Funny enough, you now know how the bat felt when he bit you. Eventually, you slip into the dumb rabies phase. Your brain has started the process of shutting down. Too much of it has been turned to liquid virus. Your face droops. You drool. You're all but unaware of what's around you. A sudden noise or light might startle you, but for the most part, it's all you can do to just stare at the ground. You haven't really slept for about 72 hours. Then you die. Always, you die. There's not one single thing anyone can do for you. Then there's the question of what to do with your corpse. I mean, sure, burying it is the right thing to do, but the virus can survive in a corpse for years. You could end the lives of every rabid animal on the planet today, and if 2 years from now some moist, preserved, rotten hunk of used-to-be brain gets eaten by an animal, it starts all over. So yeah, rabies scares the crap out of me, and it's freaking everywhere. Story 78. AI is the biggest threat, and we all must become aware fast with government adverts and free ebooks and other data on what AI is and what it is going to be used for. Health to start, then for interfacing our brain with a CPU, easiest way to explain, and can then type multiple emails at once or do things like you do on your phone while making your dinner or working out. A lot of jobs will be digital or technical in the next 20 years, and if you're young now, learn computer science or infotechnology. You will get a job anywhere, even if it needs no computer science or tech skills. The units are in department, and they prove you're a hard worker and a learner. Story 79. Stress. My father got ALS when I was growing up, and my mom took care of him. She had to basically do everything for him. Feed him, bathe him. He was pretty much paralyzed. We had a nurse come for a couple hours in the morning to help him get out of bed and stuff, but for the most part it was just my mom and, of course, me doing most of the work. After I moved out, she was by herself with a little bits of help here and there, and she got so stressed out that when she got a cut, her blood was pretty much clear. She has freckles and they disappeared, and hair started falling out. Eventually, her ovaries detached and had to get sewn back, and the doctor tested her blood, and apparently, stress made her iron level drop to a 2 or 1. Iron is measured on a scale of 1 to 10, and a healthy person is usually a 6. She sat in the hospital and got pumped full of iron for a day, and the doctor said if she doesn't get help to lower her stress, and if her iron doesn't improve, then he's going to have to get her tested for leukemia, because it looks like it's headed that way. Luckily, my aunt was getting a divorce and moved in, and the VA gave her a full-time nurse as well. Her body healed and went back to normal. Stress will break your body down and make it destroy itself without you even knowing. Story 80. Slippers and rugs for old people. Falls for old people can be incredibly dangerous. For old people who break their hip, about a third will recover enough to go back home, a third will enter long-term care, and a third will die, if I'm dredging up my lectures correctly. Falls were the ninth highest cause of disability-adjusted life years, a measurement of the impact of somebody's ill health on their life, in England in 2013, and the leading cause of injury. Unaddressed fall hazards cost the NHS in England £435 million, and fragility fractures cost us £4.4 billion, of which 1/4 goes to social care costs. Hip fractures are responsible for about half of this total cost, or about £2 billion. Old people wear slip-on shoes, as it means they don't have to bend to do them up, but this increases their chance of tripping. They often have loose rugs, dropped items, cats, etc. on the floor that can cause them to trip as well. Story 81. 3 come to mind. Tetanus, depending on how aggressive the onset of symptoms, type of tetanus, generalized tetanus being the most common, and other risk factors, has a mortality rate of anywhere between 10 and 50%, with most cases being in the 10 to 25% mortality rate range. This is why it is absolutely critical to clean and dress wounds properly, seek medical treatment as soon as you experience any symptoms, and for the love of Von Behring, always get your tetanus boosters. Sleep deprivation. Homo sapiens are the only species that experience sleep deprivation and chronic sleep deprivation. It screws up your entire body. Immune system, digestive system, respiratory system, cognitive functions, all impacted negatively by sleep deprivation. Chronic sleep deprivation reduces both quality of life and life expectancy. TED has some wonderful talks on the subject that I would encourage everyone to look into. Childbirth is the third. Giving birth, particularly in developing countries, war-torn countries, poor countries, and the US, can be very dangerous. Be extremely vigilant about choosing your doctor, vetting other doctors at the hospital, and vetting nursing staff. If any one of them won't take you seriously if you express concern over your own health, raise hell. Story 82. As a lifelong equestrian, I'd like to add horses to the list. Many people view them as a fun tourist activity, but they are extremely powerful animals with different personalities, training history, traumas, etc. Horses communicate very effectively with their body language, but you need to study and gain experience with the animals to know how to read the signs. It's one of the reasons why I hate doing trail rides with randos from the public. People do not listen to the do's and don'ts provided by the instructors and then wonder why the trail ride has gone to crap. I've seen way too many idiots endanger themselves, their children, or other people on the ride because they act like a fool and don't listen to the guides. Story 83. As an Australian, I see a lot of people on Reddit talk about how screwed up our wildlife is. And yeah, while it's true that every creature in our habitat has venom or teeth, that's not going to be what ends you here. The 2 biggest murderers of tourists in Australia are the ocean and the weather. If you live in a climate where 27 degrees Celsius, 80 Fahrenheit is a heat wave, you have no concept of how to endure temperatures of 45 plus Celsius, 113 Fahrenheit, or hell, even mid-30s. Dehydration and heat stroke are extremely dangerous, and if they don't get you, then there's always skin cancer. The sun is stronger than you think here, and you're going to need to reapply that 50 SPF plus every 4 hours. Then there's the ocean. In South Australia, where I live, the ocean comes right off Antarctica. If you're not a strong swimmer and you get out of your depth, you're going to be in trouble. Most of our beaches don't have lifeguards, and it's not uncommon for there to be rips. If you're right down the south coast where the surf is, prime tourist hotspot, there are also waves and rocks to contend with. We have a lot of people come here from places where they don't have easy access to the beach, or they do, but they're used to something a little more gentle. There are multiple drowning deaths every year here because people just don't understand the ocean, and nobody's ever told them they need to be careful. TLDR, maybe think twice about coming here in the summer. Story 84. Wearing your seatbelt under your arm rather than over your shoulder. I've argued with my wife and daughters about this for years. They find it uncomfortable to have the shoulder portion of the belt over their chest, which is understandable. The problem is the shoulder is a pretty strong structure that can take the impact of a collision when the belt is worn normally. When the belt is positioned under the arm, it falls almost directly over the liver, and there is little to protect it in the event of an accident. I haven't had one, but a ruptured liver seems like it would suck. At one point, I presented the evidence and expressed my concerns for them, and they've kept their belts in the correct positions since. Story 85. Processed foods. Many of us have pantries upon pantries full of canned meats, dairy, snacks, cooling ingredients, and materials while not even looking at the ingredients label. For example, there was a study that found a certain preservative in certain breads and tortillas to be linked to glial cell overproduction, in turn, autism, not to mention the stripping of nutrients from our foods. Let's not wait for unhealthy things to happen when we could see our unhealthy lifestyles for what they are right now. calories could matter less. Let's focus on the quality of the things we consume. Story 86. In a similar post, someone said confined spaces. Confined spaces lack airflow and thus can harbor noxious gases like carbon monoxide. You can't smell CO, and the effects of poisoning occur rapidly. So if you enter a confined space that is filled with it, you could rapidly become dizzy and be unable to get out or call for help. Never enter a confined space without complete supervision, not because you're a child, but because you could die. Story 87. Falling. From the CDC, falls are the leading cause of injury-related death among adults aged 65 and older, and the age-adjusted fall death rate is increasing. The age-adjusted fall death rate is 64 deaths per 100,000 older adults. Fall death rates among adults aged 65 and older increased about 30% from 2009 to 2018. The increase was observed in 30 states and the District of Columbia. The fastest growing rate was among adults aged 85 and older, about 4% per year. The rising number of deaths from falls among older adults can be addressed by screening for fall risk and intervening to address risk factors such as use of medicines that may increase fall risk or poor strength and balance. Story 88. Dimethyl sulfate is extremely toxic, despite being a normal-looking methylation reagent for organic chemistry. Lethal concentrations in the air can be as low as 11 parts per million. It is absorbed through the skin/lungs, passing through unreacted, then methylating your insides, releasing sulfuric acid. Extra dangerous because it is almost undetectable by smell, and a 2 to 24-hour delayed onset of symptoms. By the time you start to feel crappy, you are likely due for an extended stay in the ICU. Methyl iodide is actually safer despite being more reactive, as it reacts with you before it gets inside of you. Story 89. Loneliness can literally end your life if it goes on long enough. I'm not talking about that stuff where you move to a new town and don't know anybody. I mean the lifelong kind, where you can't seem to bridge the gap and nothing you do seems to change it. The kind that feels like it's destroying who you are. Soul cancer. People can die of a broken heart. I feel like there's not enough good mental health support in general, and help for people who are alone and lonely. This ranges from teens all the way up to the elderly who become shut-ins. Socializing with other human beings is a basic human need that most all of us have, unless you finally get to the point where you give up and become a complete misanthrope and you're unable to even make connections anymore. Think about prison. How do they punish the worst offenders there? Solitary confinement. More people fear loneliness than they do death. It's a very serious epidemic all over the world right now, and there's just honestly not much, if anything, being done about it. I feel like there should be classes in school to teach kids to socialize in a healthy way and make friends, as well as a mandatory place in every town, city, village, etc., where people can find their people. Society with all this technology that pretends to connect us does nothing but put us further apart, and it's a damn shame the number of people who take their own lives every day or turn to drugs simply because they get to a point where they don't know how else to cope. I really hope one day something will be done about this, so nobody ever has to feel alone or be alone again. It's such a needless thing that could be avoided. I realize there are many other problems in the world, but this is a very real one too that's just never even been attempted to be dealt with in a realistic manner. To me, that's a damn shame. Anyway, just some thoughts. Just passing through. Story 90. Any form of energy, literally any form, redirected, can screw you up. That was the takeaway from a work and safety course I took. Enormously heavy things 1 inch off the ground, potential energies equal to mass times height. That can end you. Same for a tensioned cable if it snaps. A spinning table saw blade, yep, that's got enough kinetic energy to suck you in by your sleeve and wreck you. Chemical energy can do it, compressed air can do it, extreme temperature can do it. The one I thought was freaky was that almost anything in a fine enough powder can become explosive. Sawdust in the air, explosive. Metal particles in an industrial setting, explosive. You get so much surface area that any combustion at all becomes a fire that spreads so quickly, it's an explosion. Story 91. Huge crowds. A crush, in some countries it is wrongly called a stampede, is where people are crushed or suffocated by the pressure of bodies around them. This often happens once a crowd reaches a certain density of people such that motion can make waves through the crowd. Basically what can happen is that someone in one part falls down, and the people are so densely packed that the pressure around the now gap in the crowd causes the people around the opening to fall down. Eventually the bodies accumulate, and people are crushed or suffocated. This can also happen just by being pressed against a solid object, such as a wall or barricade. What really makes them deadly, however, is that often crowds can be so large that people can be dying in one area while other members are completely unaware. This makes it so that the only people who have the ability to stop the crush end up being the people who don't even know it's happening because they're too far away. This is contrary to the common example of people getting trampled on Black Friday, where you ask yourself how people didn't notice they were stepping on someone. Falling down in a huge crowd is absolutely deadly. Luckily for me, I don't really like crowds to begin with, so being in that situation is unlikely for me. However, if you find yourself in big crowds often, be very, very aware of what's happening. And that goes for things go wrong for you or someone else. Because as OP said, the people who can do something when something goes wrong often don't know about it. Story 92. Minor dog bites. I got lacerated once trying to get my small dog out of the jaws of a big dog. 1-inch finger laceration/puncture. Self-treated until my recently graduated MD daughter-in-law called me stupid. Went to urgent care within 48 hours. Who refused to treat, and I had to go to the ER. Who took it incredibly seriously. Gamma globulin and antibiotics injections, plus tetanus booster, and then the rabies regimen. Couldn't ID the dog. $5,000 out of pocket with insurance. Neighbors were able to ID the dog and courts took over. I get $75 a month till the bills are paid. Then, last November, my brother went to Costa Rica. Third day there, he was ankle chomped by a neighbor's dog. Bro is a massage therapist, so he decides to heal himself by cleaning, hot packing, wrapping the wound. After a week, his leg is twice the normal size. 8 weeks and 5 courses of different antibiotics later, mostly injected, he was finally able to walk onto the plane home. This was during the height of COVID, so he fortunately shelled out for travel medical insurance before going there. Rabies isn't a big deal in Costa Rica, but losing a leg because of an infection that gets to the bone can be. Story 93. Talking with helium balloons. If the concentration of helium in those balloons is high or pure enough, not mixed with oxygen, and you've been inhaling nothing but helium long enough, you'll get a euphoric high and then pass out or even die. Since we can only tell that we're suffocating by the increase in carbon dioxide, which we still exhale, and not from the lack of oxygen that we need, you can't tell that you're suffocating until it's too late. However, most party balloon helium tanks you get are mixed with enough oxygen that you don't suffocate. Story 94. Falling in love. I know this doesn't sound serious, but hear me out. Most people who take their own lives do it because of something involving love. When you fall in love, you surrender yourself to the other person. Some people are strong enough to handle the pain that comes with it, and others aren't. It could also be the love of a family member. Death by broken heart is a real thing. It's when people who have been together for so long that their souls combine to become one, which is when you hear about couples who die days apart because they've been married for years. Love is a lot more dangerous than people realize. Story 95. Diarrhea. Okay, sorry, I just have to come in for a second here. This coming right after love, insane tonal shift. Okay, sorry, moving on. In 2017, almost 1.6 million people died from diarrheal diseases globally. This is more than all deaths from all intentional injuries combined in the same year. Almost 800,000 died from taking their own lives, 405,000 from homicide, 130,000 in conflict, and 26,500 from terrorism. In total, 1,355,000. Diarrheal diseases were the third leading cause of death of children younger than 5 in 2017, and are becoming an increasing burden in people aged 70 and older. The highest mortality from diarrheal diseases is in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Most childhood cases of diarrhea are caused by rotavirus, and most diarrhea cases in older people are caused by Shigella bacteria. The highest risk factors for development of diarrheal diseases are unsafe drinking water and poor sanitation. For children, child growth failure and vitamin A deficiency are also important. Rotavirus vaccines are effective at preventing diarrhea in children and have saved more than 128,000 lives of children in 2016. Oral rehydration therapy is a low-tech solution to treat people with diarrhea. It has saved more than 70 million lives since its first use in the 60s. Story 96. A few spoons of water. Bath time for the elderly and bath time and swimming for the little ones. Many older people take serious falls, but it only takes something like a couple teaspoons of water for a little one to dry drown. Instead of breathing in the water, a small amount makes their vocal cords spasm and close. I read about this years ago where babies will accidentally breathe in just a minuscule amount, oftentimes mom not even realizing it, and afterwards baby takes a nap and doesn't wake up. I know this is somewhat rare, but just reading that one story made me hyper-aware, and I would rather keep bath time short. It gives me a bit of anxiety. She plays with the faucet, so I've bought 2 covers, because my eldest hit her head on a faucet, but this baby takes them off quicker than I can put them on. She messes with her bath temperature, so I have to keep correcting the temp, and of course, worst of all, I worry she'll fall. She likes to try to walk around. If anyone has safety tips like a good faucet cover or how to keep a baby from wanting to frolic through the tub, please let me know. And if your little one goes under for even a second, even if they seem fine in the pool or bathing, keep an eye on them. Symptoms of dry drowning are difficulty breathing or speaking, irritability or unusual behavior, coughing, chest pain, or low energy or sleepiness after a water incident. Story 97. Heat and lack of hydration. Heat injuries, severe dehydration, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, etc. can sneak up on you because most people don't experience them beyond just being hot and thirsty at, say, an amusement park or a sporting event. But when they hit, it can be sudden, and the effects significant, life-threatening at their worst, and they need very quick and appropriate interventions. Hiking and camping and going to wilderness parks are very popular these days, and if you're going in the summer, don't underestimate how much water you should be taking with you and consuming even if going out for only a few hours. Story 98. Pool and hot tub water. I'm not saying drowning in it. I'm saying the water itself. I've worked in aquatics for over 10 years. I've held on to a CPO, Certified Pool and Spa Operator license, for 7 years, and have worked on everything from athletic training pools to apartment complex pools. They are disgusting, to say the least, but the amount of chemicals that go into them to make it safe to swim in is insane, and the chemicals we put in are extremely dangerous on their own. For example, acid is added to all pools, like burn your skin to the bone acid, all to balance out the pH. We have to wear full protection gear to add it to the feeder. We dilute it before adding it to the feeder, but even the diluted stuff will burn through your skin. The feeder adds a small amount of it to the pool every 10 minutes or so, but it just takes a malfunction to dump the whole thing in, cooking everyone alive. Then the chlorine is also super hard to maintain. If it's too high, you will leave with chemically burned skin. If it's too low, you can get sick from the millions of germs you're supposed to be destroying. Most people who test pools don't really know what is too high or too low, especially at places where the pool isn't the moneymaker like hotels. Also, for outside pools, we add an additional acid to the pool to help protect the chlorine because chlorine burns up more in the sun. Then there are the filters and pumps. Some filters have such fine media that when dry, will cut up your lungs if inhaled. The pumps also have super strong suction. Look up Virginia Graham Baker Pool Law. It is about a law that was passed because drains at the bottom are super dangerous, and a child got eviscerated by one. And finally, the water itself. To fill an average pool, you need 30 to 50,000 gallons of water. That's a lot of water, and extremely expensive. They recommend draining a pool about a foot every month and adding fresh water. No one does this because it is expensive because of the water and sewage costs. So a lot of pools have water that's been sitting there for 6 months to a year or more, all just constantly getting more chemicals added and never getting changed. Final note, I personally still go in some pools, especially if it's a place I've seen people maintain the pool or the pool is the main focus. I'm not trying to say never go in a pool again. It's a lot like vaccines. The right people work with the dangerous stuff and balance them out so we can all enjoy the benefits. A side note, hot tubs are gross. Never go in those. 2 people in a hot tub is equivalent to 250 people in a regular pool. I've never been in a hot tub personally, but just thinking about it, it seems like the perfect festering grounds for bacteria. Ugh. It's funny that OP spent so long, though, being like, pools are scary, ooh, and then was like, no, but still go in pools. Nah, man, you freaked me the hell out. Anyway, that's all the stories we have for today. I would like to thank you so very much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.